No, Comedy Central. That is the theme of the book, which has been written by Art Bell. It's called Constant Comedy, How I Started Comedy Central and Lost My Sense of Humour. He joins me by Zoom this afternoon. Art, it's lovely to talk to you. How are you? And thank you for joining me on the programme.
I'm good, Jer. Thanks for having me.
No, first things first, the most important thing is you really haven't lost your sense of humour, have you?
No, I haven't lost my sense of humour.
Good.
There were moments in those days when I did lose my sense of humor, but for the most part, it's still intact.
I could imagine that something like, a television station dedicated to nothing but one particular subject could lose its appeal very quickly. So it was a risk when you made the pitch to the HBO chairman at the time, and it wasn't as simple as making a pitch and having it happen. So what happened after you made the pitch?
Well, interestingly, the chairman wasn't the first person I made the pitch to. Okay. I made the pitch to the head of HBO programming because, listen, I was very low on the organizational chart at that moment, and she was very high. I had no idea I could ever get in to see the chairman. So I went to the head of programming and I said, Bridget, I think HBO ought to start, an all-comedy channel. And she said, that is a terrible idea. And I'm going to tell you why. And she spent 15 minutes telling me why she thought it was a bad idea. So that was my first turn down. Now, I had been thinking about this thing for 4 or 5 years. And when you say a single subject channel may not have been a good idea, you got to remember there was an all news channel. There was an all sports channel, ESPN, which, by the way, at the beginning was showing, girls' high school field hockey. I mean, they just had nothing. But it was an all sports channel. And there were lots of single subject channels popping up. And I thought, hey, there's an all music channel. Why can't there be an all comedy channel? But Bridget thought that was a terrible idea. She said no comedians would ever be on it. And I said, oh, interesting. But I knew she was wrong. And the way I got in to see the chairman is kind of interesting. My boss came by and said, what are you working on? I said, I'm just, playing around with this idea for a comedy channel. I was writing it up. And he said, let me see it. He took a look. He said, the chairman ought to see this. I said, oh, that's great. Okay. He said, come on, let's go. We're going to go right into his office right now. And I was so scared, but I went.
Who was the chairman at the time?
Michael Fuchs.
Okay. And
Michael Fuchs. And he had just been named, by the way, 2 weeks earlier, the most powerful man in Hollywood by the New York Times.
Right.
And I was not named, but I was probably the least powerful man in Hollywood at the same time.
So you arrive in with your boss into the all-powerful office and tell us how it went.
Well, the first thing Michael said was, what are you guys doing here? You don't have an appointment.
Right. Okay.
I thought, well, this is good. This is going well. And my boss said, look, Art has an idea. He wants to talk to you about it. And I said, I think we ought to do an all comedy network, and started pitching my little heart out. And I think what got me through the pitch, I didn't have any materials. I didn't have a presentation deck or anything, was that I was just very enthusiastic about it. A lot of passion. And I stated my vision for it, which I think really got him. I said, Michael, if we are successful, we are going to be the center of the comedy universe. And he loved that.
Wow.
Because, guys with that kind of ego, they want to be the center of the universe for sure.
They do, don't they? Before we go any further with your idea, your concept, tell me about HBO at that time. What were you doing and who were you doing it for?
Oh, HBO was a great place in those days. This is the 80s. I went to work for HBO in the mid 80s, and it was my first job basically out of business school. And I wanted to be in the television industry. HBO had started back. They'd gone on the satellite in 1976. So they'd started, 8 or 9 years before. And they were the future of television. They were what Netflix was, a few years ago. They were just like, oh my gosh, we are inventing television here. People were high-fiving in the halls. It was terribly successful. Money was coming out of the faucets. I mean, it was just a crazy place. And I loved it. It was really fun. A little intimidating, but a lot of fun. And I was a financial analyst and a marketing analyst to start. And that's basically what I was doing there. I found my way to new business development, but they didn't really want to develop any new channels. So When I said Comedy Channel, they said no.
Okay.
That was it.
And what was your interest in comedy? Are you or were you a comedy fan, or was it just simply it made economic sense that would work in your head?
Well, first and foremost, I was a comedy fan. I loved comedy from the time I was 7 or 8 years old. I was watching it on television. There was a weekly variety show called The Ed Sullivan Show, and all the comics were on it. All the comics, the comics of the day, the Borscht Belt comics. Mm-hmm. Richard Pryor actually had an appearance there when he was like 19 or 20 years old. Fascinating. And you know what? I was so impressed by the fact that they could get my father, who was in the room watching, to laugh, and my kid brothers to laugh, and me to laugh, and 30 million people in the audience to laugh, not even to mention the studio audience. These guys were very powerful. And they were just, they had a lot to say. And I fell in love with it. I thought comedy was the coolest thing. And not only stand-up comedy. I love comedy movies. I even like comedy books, funny books, satires. I remember reading Catch-22 by Joseph Heller when I was about 7th grade. I read it 3 times. I just thought it was so funny.
Okay.
So that was my interest. I was a fan.
All right. Now, let's talk about the book itself. Firstly, why did you write it?
Well, I'd never written a book. I'd done some writing, a little bit of writing along the way. Listen, when you're in television, especially in programming, you're called on to write things, including work on scripts and stuff like that. But I decided after leaving the television business that I wanted to write memoir. So I started writing about my childhood. And I took a class at a writing institute. And the people in the class generally liked my stuff. But I wrote one short piece on something that happened to me at Comedy Central. And they said, wow, we didn't know you did that. That's really interesting. Why don't you write more on that? So I started writing more on that. And then I realized I had a lot of stories from those days, and it could be a book. But making a book is more difficult than writing a bunch of stories.
All right. You're in the chairman's office. You're with your boss, and something in the chairman's head kind of goes, yes, we might be onto something here. How did it then develop from there?
Well, it's not like he said, okay, let's go. Let's put this together and launch. He said, it sounds like an interesting idea. He asked me a lot of questions. And one of the important questions he asked was, listen, comedy, very expensive. And I said, well, I think I got a way to do it cheaply from the get-go. And I explained to him that the way MTV started in the television business was they played free music videos. They got all those music videos for free. And I said, we can do the same thing. We can take clips from movies and television shows and play those until we, put movies on and get enough money for series and our own stuff. And he said, well, that's great, but you can't do that. I said, I think you can. And I told him how I thought we can. We could use a promotional exception that allows you to take a 3-minute clip from a movie without paying for it.
Okay.
And that was the insight that got me past, go. Anyway, what Michael said was, sounds like an interesting idea. Let's explore it. We're going to have to go talk to the studios, the guilds. We're going to have to do some research. We're going to have to put a demo tape together, and you're going to have to sell this to the executive committee.
You are.
So that's, yeah, right.
It's not going to be my head.
That's like, let me tell you, this was like the dog catching the car, because I had no idea that day when I went to work that somebody was going to say, yeah, that sounds like a good idea. Try it. They teamed me up with the head of comedy programming at HBO. His name was Stu Smiley.
Really?
You not?
Really?
Yeah. Yeah. You couldn't make that
No,
up,
you
right?
could not.
Anyway, Stu was in the comedy business in a way that I wasn't. I wasn't in the comedy business. Stu had been working in comedy for 10 or 12 years. He knew all the comedians. He knew their managers and agents. And the first thing he said to me when he met me was, the hell do you know about comedy?
Right. How come
he didn't say it nicely? He didn't say it nicely.
And did you ask him how he hadn't come up with an idea like this?
You know what? I didn't feel I was in a position to start threatening my superiors. Actually, we were teamed up. We were supposed to work together on the thing. But, Stu was an expert and I was not. So I was really kind of deferential at the beginning.
So in the book, what do you tell us about your role then within creating the Comedy Central as we came to know it?
Interestingly enough, the first thing I had to do was sell it to the executive committee. So we put together a big presentation and at that time they threw some other resources at me, as you can imagine, so I was working with some other executives, to do the financial analysis, make sure it was going to make money, the programming analysis. We had to meet with all the studios and all the guilds, the Directors Guild, the Writers Guild, and make sure everybody is cool with it, and meet with advertisers. Interestingly, when we met with the studios, the first thing they said after they heard the whole thing was, yeah, you can do this. Can we get a piece of this? Can we buy into the channel? And that was one of the first indications that maybe this will be successful.
Okay.
And I was looking for any indication, as you can imagine. And the advertisers said the same thing. They said, yeah, we like it. Can we buy in? And we said, no. Anyway, I had the big presentation, 30 executives. At the end of the presentation, Michael went around the room. He asked every one of the executives there, what do you think of this idea? And he looked them in the eye, and each one had to say what they thought. And each one of them, including Bridget, who had said it was a stupid idea, said, I love the idea. And he did that because he wanted everybody on his side, and he did not want somebody showing up 6 months later saying, I didn't really think it was a good idea at the time.
Okay.
He had everybody on record. I thought that was very clever of him.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I was going to ask you about Bridget, and you mentioned her name just there now. How was your relationship following on when she had, dissed the idea originally, but I know she says she supported it. Was it a good relationship?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, it was.
Good.
She, again, I had no experience in programming anything. I had never programmed comedy. I'd never programmed movies, which is mostly what they did at HBO, or done any original programming. She pulled me into the programming department, adopted me.
Great.
Invited me to the meetings, introduced me to everybody, and she was terrific. Okay. Again, it became a separate entity almost immediately, but Bridget made sure that she was supporting me. And I think that was partly because Michael wanted everybody to support the comedy channel. Of course. We called it the Comedy Channel in those days.
Okay. I in the notes that I received, it said that Constant Comedy, the name of the book, takes readers behind the scenes into the comedy startup on its way to becoming one of the most successful and creative purveyors of popular culture in the United States. From disastrous pitch meetings with comedians to the discovery of talents like Bill Maher and Jon Stewart. Tell us about some of the disastrous pitch meetings, because there got to be some.
It's funny. The disastrous pitch meetings were among the funniest that we heard. There was a comedian named Bobcat Goldthwait. I don't know if that's a familiar name to your listeners, but he was quite a famous comedian. And he came in, and for me, this was like a dream come true. All these comedians I never met,
right?
Had only watched on TV, were showing up in the office. And we took a pitch from Bobcat, and it was completely outrageous and so funny. I was laughing so hard, I literally slid off my chair. I can't remember what the pitch was. All I can remember was that it would never be on television. It was
right. Were you laughing at the pitch or the content of the pitch?
At Bobcat, at the whole thing.
Okay.
I mean, the whole thing was so crazy and so funny. I don't even remember what it was, but it probably involved something illegal or immoral. But, that's the thing. Let me tell you, again, the disastrous pitch meetings weren't so disastrous in that they were bad. They were just not worth, we couldn't put them on television. A lot of comedians, a lot of comedy writers pitched us because they were so pleased that somebody was throwing a channel for them, because they hadn't had a channel before. Musicians had MTV, comedians didn't have anything.
Sports guys had their sports and all that, yeah.
We heard from all of them, and some of them were pretty crazy. I did take the pitch from Bill Maher, though, by the way.
Did you?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I took Bill Maher contacted the Comedy Channel, as so many comedians did. It was Comedy Central by then. It was 1992. And he said, I want to talk to somebody about an idea I have. So we said, okay. So one of my colleagues and I were down in Southern California, and we met with Bill Maher. And he picked us up at our hotel and took us to a diner. And we sat in a diner, and he leaned over the table and he said, I want to do a talk show where people actually talk. They don't push their book. They don't talk about their new movie. I want to hear what they have to say. It's going to be no bull, and it's going to be politically incorrect. And that's what I want to call it. And we said yes on the spot. And we had no money for it, by the way.
Okay.
We were just like, making it up.
Were you trying to be kind of, contentious? Were you trying to make headlines? Were you trying to get people to say, did you hear about what happened on that new channel?
Yes. The short answer is yes. I mean, one of the things we had to do was get noticed.
Yeah.
And it's hard to get noticed, especially in the media business, television business. So we decided early on that we were going to do not so much outrageous things, but somewhat outrageous so that we get press. We wanted to get picked up in the press. Look at what those crazy guys over at Comedy did today. Mm-hmm. And we kept looking for them. We kept plugging into either popular culture of the day. For example, we decided because somebody had the idea to cover the State of the Union address given by the president every year. We decided to cover that live and have a comedian make jokes about what the president was saying at the time.
Okay.
Now, when I first heard this, because it was pitched to me, I said, man, that's a crazy idea. And then I said, let's do it, because it was such a crazy idea, and I thought we would get press on it. So we did it. We got Al Franken, who was on Saturday Night Live at the time and had done live television, right? So we figured he'd be perfect, and he loved the idea, so he was going to do it. And we did the show, and the next day the LA Times wrote probably our first favorable review of the channel, where they said, we've been watching Comedy Central for a long time, and since they started 3 years ago, and these guys are really doing things that nobody else is doing. And we got to, we have to applaud them for that. And that was a big moment for us.
When did you leave?
I left in 1996.
And when you left, were you a happy bunny?
I was an unhappy bunny.
Okay. Why?
I got fired.
Oh.
I got fired. What happened is I was head of programming and head of marketing. My boss at the time was fired by the board.
Okay.
He was the president of the channel. And they brought in a new president. And one of the board members called me, who had put the new guy in, Doug Herzog. Good guy. Put the new guy in, and he said, oh, man, Art, you are going to don't worry, you're going to love this guy. He's great. He's terrific. And I said, I'm a little worried.
Yeah.
Anyway, I was there for another 3 months before Doug said, Art, you got your fingerprints all over this place. I can't have you around here. So
new broom sweeps clean.
He fired a lot. He fired a lot of people, which is, there's two approaches when you take over a company. Elon Musk's approach.
Yeah. I was thinking the same thing.
Shoot before you aim, and fire everybody and say, I know how to do this. Or, the approach that I generally took in my career subsequently, and probably before that, was, when you inherit a staff, see who's good, see who's not, see where you want to fill. And yes, you're going to end up losing some people because for whatever reasons, you don't get along, you don't see eye to eye. But give everybody a chance. Anyway, that was not the way it went.
Did it become a monster you created at any point?
Well, I have to say the early days of comedy were monstrous. The day after we launched, the press just trashed us.
Really?
And I'm talking about, Rolling Stone, The Times, Variety. They were saying things like, what is HBO thinking? This channel is not funny. It's not any good. They said they were going to make a funny channel. It's not funny. We have no idea what Michael Fuchs is doing. Now, remember I said I lost my sense of humor?
Yeah.
That was actually something Michael said. He called me, and by the way, the press was so mean to us the first 3 months. I went to work every day. Every day I went to work thinking I was going to lose my job and they were going to shut down the channel.
Really?
Not in that order.
Right. Okay.
But I kept going, but one day, 3 months in, Michael called me and a couple other executives in, and he said, Art, it took a comedy channel to get me to lose my sense of humor.
Okay. And
I looked around and nobody in the room was laughing.
Right.
And I thought, yeah, this is not funny anymore. Comedy can be brutal.
Pressure. A lot of it. All righty. Well, the name of the book is Constant Comedy, How I Started Comedy Central and Lost My Sense of Humour. Art Bell is the author. Art, I wish you well with it. Our listeners can get their hands on it by going to our virtual bookstore on our website at tre.radio. And I hope they do that in their droves and many others across the world as well. It's been fascinating talking to you about the establishment of Comedy Central. And I can imagine it wasn't an easy run, and you've given us a few examples as to how that'll be proven right. So I wish you well with it. Thanks a million for talking to us today, and wish you a happy Christmas and a great 2023 as well.
And to you too. Thank you very much for having me.
Thanks ever so much.